To you the podcast Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. We discuss a range of topics that include addictions, religious abuse, and recovery. This live platform offers meaningful questions and answers, a counseling continuum, and valuable feedback from professionals and others who have been through the process and are healed, forgiven, and reconciled. If they can achieve this, so can you. This program can be heard on iHeart, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, and others. Make no mistake, this podcast sustains and implements three things: healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation within the Church of God. Thanks for listening.
Good day, friends. Thank you again for tuning in tonight for the podcast, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. We discuss a litany of different topics on this live podcast, and we offer counseling sessions and a counseling continuum. And of course, our main focus tonight is to give some excellent question and answer on these very important discussions. Our staff includes Ms. Tennille. She does a technical part of the broadcast podcast. Sister Alita does the programming. Kenneth probes. He's like our historian, and he's about 88 years old, so he knows about Church of God going back years and years ago. And my name is Prince, licensed counselor, founder of Antioch Youth Center, retired. So again, I just want to thank you for joining us tonight for this live call-in podcast. And thanks for viewing. We do mean that, not just saying that. We've expanded extra couple platforms this last couple of weeks, and we're on Amazon Order. You can order archive podcasts through Amazon Order, and of course, those are free of charge. Audible.com, also Podbay FM. Also, we're on that platform. And of course, you know about Buzzsprout, Poddash, and iHeart Sitter, and of course Amazon Music, Pandora Review, and SoundCloud, Poddash, Apple, YouTube, and of course Facebook. But tonight, if you want to chime in, you can. You can text. That number is 1-866-538-3664. Again, that number is 1-866-538-3664. If you have questions or comments, you can feel free. You can go to YouTube and type in Church of God in Macon, Georgia. You'll see the live banner there. Also, we have a Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches email that you can email your questions or comments, and that is www.reeechone@aol.com. And of course, our number, you can call in the Wounded Hearts. That number is 478-283-9093, 478-283-9093. Friends, the topic we discussed many times are quite sensitive. And our platform guests come from an array of different people, different objectives and ideas. But we do want to discuss these things. Do we agree always with our platform people? No, we don't. But discussing things, working through process is where understanding starts. So we want to do that on this live podcast to interview people who've been through issues and can tell us how they went through and how they were able to serve God even after the wounded heart and wounded church issue has been behind them, how they can go on and serve God in an exciting and loving way. So again, some of the discussion will desire and look for some listening discretion on that. But to be clear, our main focus on this podcast is to supplement and support three things: reconciliation and healing within God's church. That's our main focus. So we have become ministers of reconciliation. I want you to join in that process. I want to introduce our guest tonight. And again, many times, a lot of working parts in these podcasts. People We've had people who chimed in from Africa and Texas and California, and so weather affects the moving parts. So Mr. Barnard, Mark Barnard, is here again tonight, but he's trying to chime in. So he's president of Blessing Point Ministries. He holds a BA, master's degree in ministry activities. His company focuses on helping churches to reconcile and to work out differences that they may have. He works in the U.S., outside the U.S. I'm just glad to have him here tonight. So we're going to play a clip now about what Mark does. You can get a feel for his activities. He was here last week, had some exciting viewing numbers, and we're glad about that. We have him here again because he has a real good program here. Is that clip ready?
We're ready. Here we go.
In churches that have been wounded, problems tend to show up in 5 areas. First area is in what we call the corporate pulse or corporate spirit. When we look at the Jerusalem church in the book of Acts, we see itemized in those early chapters the activities of the early church. They met for worship, they prayed together, they met in large groups and small groups, they received teaching, they worshiped, they evangelized. All those activities we see reflected in modern day churches. But there's something else in that early church, and that's the spirit of the church. Joy was in the atmosphere. People were coming to the Lord daily. There was an incredible sense of unity among the leaders. And so we want to look past the activities of a church and try to measure the spirit of the church. Is there a strong pulse? Is there a strong spirit? The second area where problems show up in wounded churches is in a lack of trust for leadership. You can easily imagine that if we've been hurt by an individual, we're going to be slow to trust that person in the future. Well, the same dynamic takes place in the local church if painful things have happened, because leaders are usually associated with that pain. And so their trust in leaders diminishes on behalf of their constituency until someone comes in and heals the original wound. The third area where problems tend to show up is in poor communication. People don't talk about the things they really need to talk about, painful things, or church discipline issues go ignored. One of the comments we often hear from people that we work with is that we should have talked about these things years ago. The fourth area where problems show up is in a lack of mission or vision fulfillment. And you can easily imagine if a church has a weak corporate pulse, there's not enough trust for leaders, if there's poor communication, it's inevitable that they're going to have difficulty accomplishing the mission Christ has given them in their community. And on top of that, he's going to be slow to bless that ministry because there's all these problems in the church. The fifth area where problems tend to show up is in historical wounds. These are the actual painful events, the crises that have taken place in the history of a church that create these other symptoms. They can range anywhere from pastoral immorality to abuse of funds, to a church split, to prejudice exercised by the church as a whole. They can take many, many forms. So how do you figure out if your church suffers from problems in these areas? I want to refer you to the book Diagnosing the Heart of Your Church. You can find it on our website. And the other thing I would recommend would be the Church Scan Inventory, which will help you figure out how impacted your church has been by these kinds of issues. It's a free ministry assessment tool on our website that individual can come and take, leaders can take and discuss among themselves. And I think these things will help you discern if your church struggles from these kind of issues.
And again, we have Mark Barnard, president of Blessing Point Ministries, and they are a corporation program that reaches out to churches with issues, split problems, and he comes in to negotiate and to facilitate unity within the body of Christ. Mark, are you there, audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well,
We just
obviously, I have a face made for radio. That's why I'm not showing up here.
you do. It's very nice too. I enjoy
Very
it.
soothing.
All right, we got a lot to cover in these few moments. Couple things from last week that was very poignant. You said that, back in the 1820s, the church was unable to come together on the slavery issue.
Mm,
And I know that for sure because I've studied the Methodist history on that.
mm.
And because of that, the U.S. split on it, and that brought on war. That is a very heavy burden to carry, because had they been able to come together, history could have been so different. Am I wrong or right?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think theoretically you're right. I also think God had his purposes for that war.
Sure, sure,
And so, I mean, if you look at and we're kind of talking about the big picture.
sure.
If you look at the history of the United States, of course, we had a civil war, which was really the Revolutionary War.
Mhm,
We had a civil war in the mid 1800s. We basically had a cold civil war during the civil rights movement 100 years
mhm,
after that. And I was very surprised to discover that there was a civil war in America 100 years before the Revolutionary War
mm,
in the city of
mm.
Jamestown.
Okay.
It was when it was very first founded. The founder was like a governor that came over from England, and one of his cousins came over and had a very competitive spirit. And he had some hard feelings toward the Indians, and he set himself up as a general. And he was not well received by the governor or the current citizens. He actually burned down Jamestown
Wow.
exactly 100 years before the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
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 So our nation has a problem with submitting to authority, and
Mm,
it has revealed itself and reveals itself about every 100 years.
mm.
Mm.
Do you got a lot of questions here? It's tough to. Mark, you mentioned last week that if there is a minister or a pastor or a teacher that has an issue, in order to regain the people's confidence, he has to do two things. Number one, he's got to be transparent and he's got to be honest. Is that
Right.
true? How to
That,
regain that broken trust, or maybe just
well, it depends. I mean, if it's a one-off and a leader has just stumbled, he said some things he shouldn't say, or he broke
mhm,
trust in
mhm,
some way, and he's got a humble spirit and he wants to make it right, he can confess that to the people involved and be truthful and transparent moving forward. If, however, you're a pastor coming into an existing church
mhm.
where your predecessors have broken trust with the congregation, you as the new guy inherit that stigma.
Mm.
And
Sure.
you could be the most trustworthy person in the world, but because of those who went before you kind of defiled the office of pastor in that church, that has to be healed. And that takes more than simply truth and transparency. That takes standing in the place of those previous leaders, asking the congregation's forgiveness as if you were the offender, and asking the Lord to forgive that role so he can cleanse the church's relationship with the church. Because when these painful things happen, we tend to obsess about how they affect us individually, but
Sure.
they cast a shadow over the entire church's ministry in the eyes of the Lord. I mean, I don't know
Mm,
when we came to practically believe that God overlooks sin in the camp, but we seem to live as if he does. And he
mm.
does not. And I wrote a blog post this week, and comment in there was about Achan. And I said, Achan was the first person in the Bible to hide something under a rug that we know of, but church
Mhm.
people have been following his example ever since.
Wow. Wow.
So
Oh,
you get
Wow.
into a lot of churches where there's some buried, smelly stuff under those carpets that kind of oozes out every once in a while and causes another crisis in the church.
Mark, we talked about pain in the church. Some of the stories can be quite poignant and quite painful, Kenneth. I can remember back when I was a child, you're talking 50 years ago, and we had a church split in Detroit. Well, I don't want to see where it was, but it's just like yesterday. And the ramification of it is just going on for generations. The police had to be called out, and locks on the door. And I mean, and that just the effect of it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? I mean, the pain of it.
You can't see me, but I'm bowing and shaking my head because I've seen it happen so many times. And the little thing you said there in your testimony was that it felt like it happened yesterday. I mean, that's how fresh and impactful those kind of wounds are to people who go through that.
Generally speaking, Mark, are the issues similar from group to group, or are the issues more of a potpourri? Are they trust issues?
They're similar.
I mentioned last week, Dobson statistics, 38% of ministers, pastors have inappropriate, connection with people in the church, and on and on and on. So what are some of the similarities that you find in the correlations of church splits and division?
When I say similarities, I mean that all denominations go through the same kind of painful crises, right? There's not necessarily one, that we're dealing with over and over again, but each church's history is different and unique. But it's almost like a shotgun of expressions. Sexual immorality, church splits. This is one I've come across recently, and that is where people idolize the pastor or idolize the building, particularly, or idolize a particular program, and any of those things can become a sacred cow. And the Lord doesn't really like idols.
It's true.
In churches especially. And so that's one that I've seen recently. Another one that I'm kind of still dealing with the after effects of a church in Florida is just rebellion. Can you imagine this? Imagine this scene. You're a young pastor. You're the second pastor of the church. The previous founder pastor is in his 70s. He's still in the church. He doesn't leave after retiring. He doesn't like the fresh-faced kid who comes in, right?
Oh my.
And he actually heckles the young preacher while he's preaching in the sanctuary.
Wow.
Now, what is the Lord going to think of that? And since he is a favored servant and has a track record, the elders are not going to call him out on that. And so the elders don't call him out on that. And you have this kind of rebellious spirit that doesn't go away because no one ever confronted the first perpetrator. And it just spreads through the body over time and affects all different aspects of the ministry. So that's a fascinating one to watch happen.
Now, do splits affect children, grandchildren in the church?
Well, they do. It's just, just heart-rending stuff. Imagine especially the children of the pastor involved.
Oh my!
When the pastor is getting, one of the problems we see often is a pastor eating church. A church that has a tendency to devour pastors, right? Well, the families get caught up in that. The wife gets caught up in that. The children get caught up in that. Some of them leave the church and walk away from the Lord and don't want anything to do with ministry or anything that smells like a church because, like you going through that split, they were painfully impacted by that behavior.
Now, Mark, are there any hindrances when you go to a church to help? Some people don't want help sometimes. In my background in counseling, you'd be surprised at how many people come for counseling, but really don't want counseling. I'm talking about when I was in Atlanta area there. Some just didn't want it. I mean, did you face that? Some people, and if they don't want it, why don't they want it?
Yeah.
Question.
Well, the last half of the question is a little easier to answer. They're unhealthy people who are used to the way things are.
Okay.
Dysfunctional churches attract dysfunctional people. because dysfunctional people are comfortable operating in dysfunctional environments, and they can sense it. It's like they have a radar for it, and they feel as soon as they walk in, they say, "Oh, this is my new home," and they can tell that their bad behavior will be tolerated in that particular environment.
Oh my.
So that's one reason why they don't want to change. What was the first part of that question? I forgot.
Some don't want change and they might come for help, but they just don't want it.
Yeah.
But Mark, that's pretty scary because if they're there and really don't want help, like the old saying says, you can horse the water, but you can't make him drink. So what do you do if you're facing a group and you sense that? How do you handle that?
Well, by the time they call us in, they are willing to get help, right?
Okay.
But what you're describing is the disconnect between the huge numbers of churches that need help and the few number of churches that will get help, because churches have a very high tolerance for pain, and they are very squeamish about bringing in an outsider to look at their church business, and so they have to be in quite a bit of difficulty when they call us in. My partner Ken Quick says that our ministry is like you're driving down, all those signs, on 85 or 75 going south, those big billboards that are down there in Georgia. It's like a sign, that says last chance counseling before divorce.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of our ministry. We're churches are usually close to that crisis state when they call us.
Mark, how does division start? What are the seeds of it? You said earlier about dysfunction, and oh my, that's true. Any other seeds that can produce division?
Well, I don't think the division or the discussion or the conflict is necessarily the problem. Churches are going to have conflicts just like families have conflicts. It's
true.
It's the spiritual maturity. It's the training of the elders. It's the recognition that we need to handle this in a way God can bless. It's knowledge of the scriptures to know what the scriptural procedure is to handle conflict. And the devil will test churches. The Lord will give the devil permission to test churches, and some crisis will come up that could lead to a split. And if they mishandle it, it's problematic. Sometimes, though, the Lord sends a crisis into a church, believe it or not. Much like if you remember the story of Solomon and the divided kingdom after Solomon, right? Why did the kingdom divide? Well, the Lord divided it. He anointed Jeroboam and said, "You're going to get 11 tribes. Rehoboam's going to get 1 tribe." Why? Because of Solomon's idolatry. So sometimes splits happen, not because of the issues that are immediately in play. When you think of that story, the issue that was immediately in play was Rehoboam's lack of maturity and doubling down on the taxes that his father would charge, right? That was the immediate issue. But what was really going on was that the Lord sent the crisis into their midst so that the nation would divide because he was unhappy about a previous situation on a deeper level. So to me, much of the time when division comes, it's because God is unhappy about something else. And he's sending division into the congregation, but the congregation has no discernment to recognize that. And so they act it out and it divides.
Also, I think what you're saying is all division is not bad. I want to quote this author, J. Piper. He said, "Unity is maintained, not created. Don't make light of it, but don't make death of it." In other words, some division is good. What you're saying, if we handle it right, we can come out even better, is what you're saying.
Yeah, one of the outworkings of division, I think it's in one of Paul's letters. I was reminded by another pastor of this earlier in the week. Says there must be divisions among you so that those who are approved may become evident. And so when you're in a divisive situation, there may be 1 or 2 leaders who really distinguish themselves in handling that conflict in an astute way. And that quality of their leadership may never have come out except for the crisis.
Okay.
True.
Okay. I understand that. So, Mark, you're talking to a young pastor tonight. He's just starting out. What is your counsel to him? What should he look for? Starting out a new church, just getting it going. What should he look for? What should he do?
In an established church, and he's being interviewed by the pulpit committee.
No, let's say he's just starting out.
He's already there?
He's a church plant.
Yeah.
Let's say he's got 5 people
Oh,
just
he's a
starting
church
out.
plant.
Church
Okay.
plant.
A different set of questions. What I would say to a church planter is, tell me about the church from which this church is being planted. Is it a daughter church?
Okay.
Tell me about the history of the mother church.
Okay.
Because if the mother church has had painful things happen in its history that have gone unresolved, it's very likely the daughter church will manifest those same symptoms. So that's one thing you're going to want to be aware of. Some guys think, oh, I'm just going to start a new church so I don't have the problems of an established church. But like daughter, like mother, like daughter, you're going to inherit people from that congregation who have been used to operating a certain way. And if that way has been unhealthy, they're bringing that with them into that situation. Another question is, I would want to interview that church planter and say, tell me about your background. How did you deal with conflict growing up? You know, how would you deal with conflict now? Because that person's personal experience is going to factor in to how he handles the dysfunction he may encounter. You know? So those are some practical things. There's actually a blog post on our website, blessingpoint.org, called How Not to Start a Church. And I'm not remembering all the details, but there's more good advice in there.
Well, I've been to your website and it's quite informative. Mark, our time is gone, but 2 more things. You're talking to someone tonight who's been wounded, not attending church. What is your advice to them?
That is something that requires probably more pastoral sensitivity than I have. But I would say to them to consider not only what happened to you, but to consider what God was trying to do in you through that. You know, when Joseph went through his trials, we all know what he said at the end. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. What good thing, if God is good, what good thing was he trying to accomplish through the pain that you experienced? Don't let it sideline you from the Christian life. But seek the Lord and be open to the possibility that he's trying to grow something in you that he could have grown no other way except through difficulty.
Mark, you've been doing this 15 years. You're president of the program, master's degree. Do you know of any other podcast that focuses only on reconciliation and healing within the church? Are there any one that you know of?
I'm afraid that you are the Lone Ranger. I mean, there just are not, as far as I know. You know, I've been on some other podcasts, but they were not exclusively for the purpose that you are aiming for. You're really fulfilling a unique role in the body of Christ.
Mark, if someone wants to contact you, what is your email, phone number, etc., please?
Sure. You can contact us through our website at info@blessingpoint.org, info@blessingpoint.org, and I'll be glad to respond to you by email, and we can start a conversation.
Also, the blog you mentioned, how can they connect with the blog you did this last week?
Just go right to our website. You'll see on the resource tab a pull-down menu. It'll say blog, and you'll see all our blogs there.
Friends, I've been to the website. It's wonderful. I mean, the staff is definitely able to do this work. Their degree is a doctor there. I mean, it's really good. Mark, our time is gone beyond time. Thanks again, my friend. Wonderful information to our staff people. Thank you so much. Mark, Lord bless you. Thank you to Neil and Sister Annette tonight. And to our viewers, thank you so much tonight for being here.
You're welcome.